So why are we saying that right now is the golden opportunity to buy real estate in Toronto? I personally believe that we probably have a 3 to 6 month window for buyers to take advantage of a kind of depressed market. We're in a buyer's market now. Could prices go down even further? There is hundreds of billions of dollars in mortgages renewing over the next 2 years, and looks like the Bank of Canada is a little concerned about that. I've looked at 3 creative ways for a buyer to take advantage of this buying opportunity. Hey there, people. You are watching episode 9 of the Under the Radar Real Estate Podcast with your host, Joshua Jean-Baptiste, broker with Sage Real Estate. So before we get into why right now is that golden opportunity for buyers to purchase real estate in the city of Toronto, let's explain exactly what a buyer's market is. So if you've watched our channel for the past few months, the last couple of market updates we've put up, if you're interested in the market updates, they're linked down below. We have been telling our viewers that Toronto is currently in a buyer's market, and we were looking at 2 very specific metrics that indicated to us that we were currently in what we would like to call a buyer's market. So first off, what is a buyer's market? A scenario where buyers have leverage in negotiations and are putting downwards pressure on price. There is not a ton of demand and there is a lot of supply, which creates this scenario where buyers have all the leverage. Now, the 2 metrics we look at that clearly point towards us being in this market is months of inventory and sales to new listings ratio. So months of inventory is a metric that measures the amount of time it would take for all of the current listings in the market to sell off. Balanced market for Toronto is about 2.5 months of inventory. So it would take approximately 2.5 months to sell off everything that is currently offered for sale in Toronto. Right now, our current metric is sitting at 2.6, so we're slightly above that metric. And you could say, well, you're only 0.1 above the 2.5 balance point. The key to that, though, is that number has been rising every month for the past kind of 3 to 6 months. Sales to listings ratio is basically the amount of new listings that are getting sold in any given period of time. Generally, for a balanced sales to new listings ratio, we're looking at about 50%. 50% of new listings that hit the market are selling. When we were in some of the heights of the craziness of the pandemic, we saw sales to new listings ratios as high as 70%, where 70% of new listings that were hitting the market were selling. Right now, we're sitting just under 46%, at 45.8% for a sales to new listings ratio. So only 46% of new listings that are hitting the market are selling. It's very clear to me as a realtor, and now you as a viewer, that we are firmly in a buyer's market. So why are we saying that right now is the golden opportunity to buy real estate in Toronto? We're in a buyer's market now. Could prices go down even further? I mean, they could. However, when we look at some of the leading indicators, leading economic indicators, there's a few things that are pointing towards perhaps the market changing in the somewhat near future. So I'm not an economist. However, I play one sometimes for my clients. But as a realtor, obviously, I'm joking. As a realtor, we obviously have to educate ourselves on the current state of the economy because our buyers look to us as advisors and kind of a source, a resource, and we have to be a resource for them. So when we look at some of these leading economic indicators put out by various sources, a couple of ones kind of stand out to us. So the first one is the bond market. Anyone who's tracked the bond market understands, or anyone who's tracked mortgages and the bond market understand that fixed rate mortgages are generally determined by the bond market rate of return. So when we saw mortgage rates skyrocket to almost, fixed rate mortgages specifically, skyrocket to almost 7%, that was due to the fact that the bond market, the yields had jumped to highs that we hadn't seen in decades. However, over the past few weeks, we've actually seen the bond market start to drop, the yields start to drop. And generally, the bond market is a leading indicator, and they basically can predict when central banks are likely thinking of making a rate cut. So when we look at that one, it's very interesting. It's probably pointing towards a possible rate cut in the future. Now, we can't just look at one indicator. We have to look at a bunch of different indicators. The second thing we're going to look at is basically what the Bank of Canada has said themselves. The Bank of Canada is quite worried about the amount of mortgages that are going to be renewing over the next 2 years. So if we look at back over the course of the pandemic, we saw some very, very busy real estate years. I know it's crazy to think that during a pandemic, people weren't buying real estate, but they were. So when we look at 2020 and 2021, two of some of the busiest years, even personally for me, a lot of people were buying real estate, either making upgrades, moving. There wasn't much else to spend your money on, so people were spending their money on real estate. Now, a lot of prudent buyers in those markets were locking in fixed rate mortgages. So those fixed rate mortgages, they were locking in well below 3% in many cases. And those mortgages, most people who locked in fixed rates, they're locking in for 3 to 5 years. So while there's been a lot of pain in the mortgage market for the past kind of 18 months as rates have been going up, a lot of that pain was mainly felt by variable rate payers. Variable rate payers have felt the brunt of the interest rate rise right away because, I mean, their rate was basically based on the central bank's prime rate. So they've felt the burden of the interest rate increase for the past little bit. Now, unfortunately for those people, it almost looks like the Bank of Canada was comfortable with them feeling the pain. They seem to be a lot less comfortable with some of these fixed rate mortgages renewing at some of these elevated rates. There is hundreds of billions of dollars in mortgages that are going to be, and they've already mentioned that they may be looking at some rate cuts in the near future to stymie some of that financial pain that some of these people who are renewing their mortgages will feel with these elevated rates. Right now, a 5-year fixed is in the high 5s to low 6% range. So it looks like the Bank of Canada wants to kind of put our economy in a position where people renewing mortgages aren't going to look at their mortgages jump by 50% overnight when they have to renew. Now, that's not going to happen tomorrow, and it looks like something that the Bank of Canada has said they might look at sometime in 2024, so not today. That gives us a bit of a frame of reference into why I personally believe that we'll probably have a 3 to 6 month window for buyers to take advantage of a kind of depressed market. Over the next 3 to 6 months, now I'm not here to try to make a prediction, but I think that we're likely going to see pricing either stagnate for the next 3 to 6 months, or, I mean, if inventory levels keep rising, we could even see prices perhaps decline a slight little bit. However, prices have already dropped quite a bit from the peaks that we've seen. When we look back to March of 2022, that was kind of the peak of our pricing cycle. The average price of a house was $1.3 million. As of October 2023, the average price has dropped to just over 1.1 million at 1.126. So we've already seen quite a large drop in price over that period in time. So we're likely not going to see another massive drop. I mean, almost $200,000. We're likely not going to see the average price of a home drop by another $200,000 over the next little bit. Perhaps you could see another little drop, or at the very least, pricing will stay stagnant. So we have a small window now from pretty much right now until perhaps spring, summer, I mean, perhaps it's the fall, where the Bank of Canada decides to perhaps stimulate the economy or prevent some of that mortgage renewal bloodbath that could be coming. And that's perhaps where the Bank of Canada decides to cut rates. Now, it's not for sure they cut rates then, But again, if they do, what has happened and what we've seen time and time again in our marketplace is when rates drop, that's when we see pricing start to go in the positive. We're likely going to see it start to move upwards once some of those rate cuts come into place. Now, I'm not saying that like once they start cutting rates, we're going to see pricing go back to March of 2022. I don't think we're going to see that pricing again for quite a few years in the city of Toronto. There's just, I don't see interest rates ever getting to kind of sub 2%. I mean, hopefully not again in my lifetime. I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing for any financial environment. However, when interest rates do drop a little bit, we likely then will start seeing pricing start to kind of slowly creep back up. And hopefully we're in a more healthy place in the real estate market where we don't see double-digit gains month over month or even year over year. We go back to kind of a more modest 2, 3, 4, maybe at the high 5% growth year over year in pricing going forward over the next decade. With that being said, if you're a buyer right now, especially if you're a younger buyer, a millennial or Gen Z, I myself am a millennial. I bought my first property right after the financial crisis of 2008. So I bought my first property in 2009. I took advantage of depressed pricing at that time and managed to score a 2-bedroom condo for a great price in a depressed market. And over the last 15, 16 years, managed to move up the property ladder building equity. I think right now, because pricing is likely near the bottom or close to the bottom, people are going to be buying housing right now in the city of Toronto at pricing that we're likely not going to see again. I mean, we may not see it again forever, for all I know. All right, so with this buying opportunity that is potentially out there, how is a first-time buyer or a buyer supposed to take advantage of these depressed prices in a high interest rate environment? For many of you, it seems like an impossible task. Well, I've looked at 3 kind of creative ways for a buyer, I shouldn't say necessarily creative, but things that perhaps people may not have thought of, get into the market right now and to kind of take advantage of this buying opportunity. So first off, I mean, this is the Under the Radar Real Estate Podcast. If you follow our channel, you know that we focus in on some under the radar neighborhoods. Specifically the neighborhoods we focus on are in the northwest of the city, in the old city of York. So we're talking Eglinton West and Weston and Carlton Village. So the number 1 tip I have for real estate buyers out there to take advantage of the market is look in up and coming neighborhoods. Right across the city, houses have lost value across the board. However, what I've noticed is that a lot of the up and coming neighborhoods, these houses haven't lost as much value as some of their counterparts in the more trendy areas. Typically, that what I've seen during the kind of boom cycle we've had in real estate, people were doing whatever they could to get into the trendiest neighborhoods. So they're pushing their budgets to the absolute max to get into some of these very, very trendy areas of the city. And what happens is, and then some of these neighborhoods, when prices started to go the other way, they also saw some of the largest losses in terms of year-over-year depreciation of price. A lot of the up-and-coming neighborhoods, they didn't see that same percentage decrease in price. And why is that? Well, these neighborhoods are on the upswing when it comes to pricing, right? So these neighborhoods, regardless of what's going on at a macro level, on a more granular micro level, these neighborhoods are seeing a ton of growth, whether it be because of new transit, new infrastructure, or just a changing demographic. And right now, with the market kind of being stagnant and with, pricing kind of being stagnant or perhaps going down, buying into an up-and-coming neighborhood, when the market starts to flip over and change, you could be in a position where you could see that down payment that you've invested grow at an exponential number versus some of the more trendy neighborhoods. Now, there's some downsides to looking in the up-and-coming neighborhoods. So there's a few factors to consider. I mean, with new development and new infrastructure comes construction. So it can be noise and pollution and all that kind of stuff. The schools in the neighborhood may not necessarily be from a ratings perspective where some of the other ones are. I mean, rating systems are also a little bogus in my opinion, so take that as a grain of salt. When buying into the neighborhood, the best thing to do is walk the neighborhood, go to the parks, talk to the people in the neighborhood and kind of see how they feel about things. So the second under the radar thing we can look at in terms of taking advantage of this depressed market is buying with friends or family or someone you know. A lot of the times it's really tough to come up with a down payment for a house, or it's tough to even just qualify for a mortgage, especially right now. In Canada, you have to be stress tested at a much higher percentage. So a lot of the times you perhaps may qualify for a mortgage at your income level at the posted rate, so perhaps at 5%, but when you go into the bank, because of the stress test rules, you have to be tested at an amount much higher than 5% to qualify for that mortgage. So perhaps you could afford a house at $700,000 on your income at 5%, but when you walk into the bank, they say, well, no, you have to qualify at 8% to get that. So then all of a sudden that amount that you qualify for, perhaps you can only buy a property for $500,000, $600,000 based on that elevated rate. So what I've actually had some buyers now looking at is either buying a property with friends or family. Now, it can be tough with someone with kids, or I mean, if you just need all the space for yourselves. But if you're single or if you're a couple, you don't have kids, or I mean, you could have kids, maybe there's two families, you're both renting, you both would love to purchase a property. Sometimes combining those incomes together and combining that purchase power together to purchase a home can be a very creative way to kind of get yourself into the housing market. By combining those incomes and sometimes combining down payments, you can now afford to buy a property in either a desired neighborhood. You could buy a duplex or a triplex. I've seen people buy triplexes, for example. Two people live in 2 units and they rent out 1 unit to kind of pay for some of that mortgage. There are some creative ways when you're combining incomes and combining down payments together to be able to get into the housing market rather than paying rent. Now there's some downsides to that. You have to look into like what happens if someone wants to pull out early of the arranged agreement, if someone needs to move away for work, or there's a divorce that happens or anything like that. You have to kind of go through some of those scenarios with a lawyer with some like shotgun clauses. If you're going to go into like some joint tenancy agreements and that kind of stuff. Those are all things that can be sorted out on the legal side. And if you need any advice or help with that, I can certainly connect you with a lot of real estate lawyers in the city who deal with those types of agreements all the time. So the key is in those scenarios, make sure to lawyer up and make sure that you go over all of the negative scenarios that can happen when you have these types of agreements, whether it be family or friends living together and sharing a mortgage. But the plus side to that is you are able to create more purchasing power. You're able to share costs, whether it be condo or a house. There's a lot of cost in maintaining real estate, so that cost is also shared. And then you have the bonus that perhaps like after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of owning that property, you've built equity because again, you're taking advantage of kind of lower price points. And perhaps in 5 to 7 years, when you've built up a lot of equity, you can both decide to kind of move your own way, move into your own properties, take that equity, split it 50% or however your split is, and then move on to another property. So you kind of use the current one as your step up to another one. And then the third thing that I think sometimes people don't necessarily always think about, but it exists, is the high ratio mortgages, right? So putting less than 20% down. So that's our third kind of under the radar thing. I mean, it's not really that under the radar, but sometimes not everyone thinks about it, is you don't always have to put 20% down to be able to purchase. It's really tough to gather up the funds needed to purchase real estate. You have to come up with a land transfer tax and your down payment. Now, if you are able to kind of get to that 5% threshold, you then can get what we call a high ratio mortgage. So those are 3 interesting ways perhaps taking advantage of this golden opportunity in the real estate market. We'd love to hear if you have any other perhaps ideas of how to take advantage of this kind of slightly depressed market. Put them down in the comments. We'd love to hear if you've bought in this market, if you're thinking of buying in this market, if you think we're just crazy and you want to put those comments down there. We love all comments. That's it for episode 9 of the Under the Radar Real Estate Podcast. Again, I was your host, Joshua Jean-Baptiste, broker with Sage Real Estate. If you liked what you just watched, if you like what you heard, like what you see, make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell for all of our new videos. We have a ton of super exciting content lined up for 2024. We just went through a bit of a brand revamp right now. We're still kind of putting the finishing touches on some of the logos and some of the stuff. And we have a lot of exciting content coming up in 2024. You definitely don't want to miss it. So definitely hit that subscribe and notification because there's some really exciting content coming in 2024. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.